a choice right now, between fear and love. It's just a rock.
Out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth.
Expanding reality.
A population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
There's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy.
We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity.
That's very profound. Very.
Expanding reality.
Welcome to Expanding Reality. I am your host, Brandon Thomas. On this episode, we have the honor of sitting down with mark-olly. Now, his book, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, The Mystical History of Glass and the Extinction of the World, will be dropping March 1st. So all the ways to find him linked in the show notes, of course, guys. Phenomenal conversation. We cover human origins. He destroys evolution, and it's amazing. Creation theories, this advanced race that could have been here. Also, time travel. I'm not going to ruin it, but it's a phenomenal thing. And of course, Crystal Skulls. We cover that, and it's fascinating, guys. So you're just going to love this episode. You're going to love Mark. So all of the ways to find him, like I've already said, will be located down in the show notes. If you would like to check out our affiliate links, Food Forest Abundance is linked down there, as well as Libsyn if you want to start your own podcast. And then if you're going to buy anything on Amazon, hop it through our link. It helps the show. Also, if you would like to expand your experience with us here on the program, you can do so at expandingrealitypodcast.com. That is also going to be linked down in the show notes. A lot of changes going on at the website, guys. Make sure that y'all just at least pop by there and say hi and take a look. Lives are being republished there. We're doing some live stuff going on there, so a lot of stuff is changing. So dial in. Some big things are happening. But for now, let's get to this amazing conversation. Absolutely incredible. Again, I just cannot tell you how much fun and amazing this was. So I'm just going to shut up and let's get to it. So without any further ado, let's welcome mark-olly.
All right, let's do it. You ready?
Yeah, go on your marks, get set.
Everybody out there listening, this is an awesome episode already. mark-olly and I are hanging out. You wrote an incredible book, of course, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. I cannot wait to get into this with you. So let's just go for it, man. So tell my audience just a little bit about yourself, sir, if you don't mind.
Okay, mark-olly. I'm a UK archaeologist and television history presenter. I've done things for ITV and Sky. I've been doing it for quite a long time. As we were chatting about it earlier, I'm also a musician. I'm in two bands at the moment. We tour regularly. I was professional for about 21 years. I do that more in the background now. As I'm getting older, that's the only thing with archaeologists. You see, the older you get, the more interesting you become, because we're into these old things, you see. So, the moment I'm writing books, as you know, there are, I'm trying to think about this. I think this is the fourth one actually now that's out. There's Disappearing Ninth Legion, which is about the Roman legion that walked out of York, never to be seen again. The Life and Times of the Real Robin Hood, which the chairman of the Worldwide Society said is the best Robin Hood book ever written. But if you go looking for that, it's ROBYNHOODE. So if you go on a search engine, try and spell that one correctly. Revealing the Green Man, which is quite a good bestseller. It's made the bestsellers a few times on Amazon. And now, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, The Mystical History of Glass and the Extinction of the World. So here we are.
It is so cool. I can't wait. Your work is fascinating. And so I'll definitely link Robin Hood in the bottom and all the ways to find you, of course, guys. So all the ways to find him, check the show notes. You guys know how this works. And of course, he's with Flying Disc Press. And so
yes, Flying Disc, yeah.
You're family already, man.
Anything on Amazon. Go on Amazon, type my name in, and I would say to anybody, if they want to know more about the film and television, the music side of it, and all the rest of it, then by all means, Google search, because stuff will come up. I'm on YouTube. I've done past interviews. And in fact, there's even a DVD out there somewhere, Europe's Roswell, which was released in America. It's also on Amazon Prime, and it's an investigation into a crashed UFO. So I think a lot of the listeners would find that fascinating. Obviously, as an archaeologist historian, I'm very much hands-on. I want to, find things. So the last sort of 15, 20 minutes of that is literally wreckage. So forget all the stuff that you never see. It has actually got an end to it. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. You get to see the bits that we recovered. So that's an interesting one. Europe's Roswell, it's called. It's been out around a while. Yeah. Go have a look.
Definitely. So all the ways, of course, guys, you're a fascinating guy. You check all the boxes for a phenomenal show here. And so I'm very, very excited about this. So
I don't let you down.
You definitely won't, man. Already the vibes here, man. So let's talk about the evidence for human origins.
As an archaeologist, I began to notice certainly over the last 20 years, archaeoscience has been developing in leaps and bounds now. It's not, dragging a butty box across a field looking for changes in dirt colour. It's gone a long way since then. There's a lot more going on now, since the days of programs like Time Team and what have you that popularised it in the 80s and 90s. We're now at a stage where we can examine remains in ways that previously we couldn't do. So what I did when I was writing the book, as an archaeologist, you've got to have a peg to hang your hat on. You can't just go, whoa, let's look at everything. It just doesn't work like that, as people will gather. So I thought, what can I use that is a very familiar and yet at the same time historical, long-lasting archaeological object? And that's where the head side of it comes from. As long as there's been human beings, they've had heads, at least as far as I'm aware. And most of the archaeological remains that come up, people tend to focus on the head because, of course, you can reconstruct it, you can do facial reconstruction, you can get a huge amount of information just from that one object. So it made sense. Don't forget the toe bone and the ankle bone, the leg bone, and all this kind of thing. There's loads of those knocking around, but at the end of the day, the peg to hang the hat on had to be the head, had to be the face. The other thing as well is that as human beings, when we look at these faces and we look at these skulls, you are face to face with your ancestors, the people from the past. They're actually there and they're there in front of you, which is about as close, short of a time machine, which I might come to at the very end. Short of us having a time machine, it's the closest we're ever going to get to coming face to face with the people in the past. So I took that, started looking at that, and then realized that there is actually a colossal amount of science now that has come out. When you get to the end of sort of the teens, if you like, the 20 teens, that science, certainly up to 2019, a lot of it got lost. It disappeared under the pandemic. So as soon as you flipped into the next decade, 2020, 2021, 2022, nobody seems to know what's going on. Nothing's really got out there. Things have ground to a standstill in a way in terms of communication. So I just thought, well, yeah, that's got to be a book. There has to be a book there that kickstarts the next step. So the next step now is to take all of that information, all of that data, and actually make something out of it. And essentially, that's what the book does. It literally goes through step by step, old heads, more recent heads, depictions of heads, ideas about heads, what heads are, how heads work, and then right at the very end, it pushes it forward into where that might take us. Surprisingly, when you read the book, don't take anything for granted, because it's not a journey that has an expected outcome. It takes you up all kinds of twists and turns. The most startling thing for me, the most startling side discovery, if you like, was the crystal side of it. I started off assuming that a crystal skull is a lump of rock, and that's it. They're very nice, very pretty. Stick them on your mantelpiece, they look great. There's the Mitchell Hedges skull and one or two of the other ones. And I sort of didn't really know a great deal about what that was made of, what that was capable of, what crystals could do. So for me, that was a big part of the adventure. And it really opened things up. And some of the crossovers, some of the way the science feeds across, really, really surprised me. But certainly at the beginning of the book, the main focus at the start is on DNA, which I don't think people have. How can I put it? There's a kind of an unwritten rule. There's an unwritten rule, if you like, amongst science, archaeology, history, all the rest of it, that you don't annihilate somebody else's career by putting something out there, that wipes them out before they reach retirement age. Consequently, this has held things up tremendously because people are living longer. So you might have someone who's 70 years old. So something discovered 70 years ago that completely destroys their theory or completely upsets their paradigm, you're not supposed to make a big deal of that, because you're going to kill them off. They're going to wipe them out. Their work's gone. So really, the first part of the book is me taking hold of Charles Darwin, who thankfully is dead, and all the stuff that was built on top of Darwin and it became Darwinism, and then just going, well, hang on a minute, what about DNA? Here's DNA, what's DNA telling us? That whole thing, if you like, that came post-Darwin has gone. It's basically, it's in the trash can now because of what we know about how life on Earth has developed, how species function, how things work, and it just hasn't. Somebody all those years ago planted a seed thinking they were going to get an oak tree, and they didn't get an oak tree. They got a Californian redwood. They got something completely different. The whole thing that's grown out of the science and grown out of those ideas and theories has not gone where I don't think it's gone where they expected it to go. So the opening part of the book, really, I spend a lot of time trying to sort of move people away from what they're used to. The popular idea, that T-shirt, with a little tiny like fish going up into a monkey, and then the monkey kind of goes up into, some guy that looks a bit like a gorilla who eventually goes up to some guy who's obviously pumping weights, at the end of it. That has gone. That just does not exist. It's complete science fiction. Which, having said that, half the world are going to go, yay, somebody's saying that at last. And the other half of the world's going to get a double barrel shotgun and want to, get rid of me. It's not a great way of being popular, even though it's right. So that's kind of where the book's going, and that's where it starts. It kind of starts with that whole looking at ancient people and the DNA information and the information about people that we've got that's coming out now.
Now, this is something that's so interesting about the scientific community. And yeah, you hear about this. You hear about guys who have tenure or something like that, where there's papers that people want to publish, but they're up and coming or whatever. They're subordinate in some respects, and they won't publish those findings, or they hold on to it, or just don't release it at all, or just destroy the information, or alter it in a way that doesn't perturb the original facts, which would negate the entire thing. So there is an interesting bit of politics that's involved in science, which makes people like me very leery of scientists, because anyone can be bought at this point, is what I think that a lot of us have figured out.
Yeah, that's come out of the pandemic. The science goes where everybody does something for a living at the end of the day, and that's essentially where science has gone. It's gone now to a stage where it is just as much an industry, as the guys who used to dig for coal, or the bloke who drives the bus, or, put it in context. Yes, they have a lot of toys and skill, intelligence, qualifications. You can't belittle them in that sense. But if you looked at it completely independently from a sort of social point of view, the guy that's cleaning up the road and gets rid of the trash and gets rid of the rats and all the vermin and what have you is just as important in many ways to a functioning society as the guy who's sat in his laboratory discovering that silicon dioxide mixed with nitric acid does this or whatever. It's all a part of an overall whole. It's more like the beehive mentality. It's that we all support each other sort of thing. Once you get to that appreciation, it opens up all the possibilities that whatever anybody knows ought to come out. People should share what they know, no matter who they are, no matter how diverse their knowledge is. That is the strength in the human race. The pandemic clearly showed us that. If we all gather together and we all support each other with different skills, we're going to get through it, whatever it happens to be. And that's in the book as well. There's a very strong, very, very strong backbone, if you like, running through the book that basically says no matter how diverse the book is, at the end of the day, it's that diversity that's going to get us through, not the idea that we can genetically modify society to suddenly all be the same, because that is never going to work. The universe, the galaxy, the planets, our planet, nature, everything is not in any way, shape or form uniform. So it's not so much a case of mankind, going on mankind's insecurities to try and narrow everything down and pigeonhole and box it. What we need to do as a race is appreciate diversity and get used to being uncomfortable, and getting used to things opening up. And that's one of the big emphasis behind the book itself, is to say, for goodness sake, this book's coming from an archaeologist. It shouldn't be coming from me. It should be coming from some guy who's like on a par with Stephen Hawking. You know what I mean? That's where it should be coming from. But at the end of the day, it's not. It's coming from me because I'm diverse. That's what I am. I'm all inclusive, and that's how I like to be, which is something archaeology does teach you. I mean, going back to that again, once you're digging on a dig site, which is the remains of another human race from days gone by, everything confronts you. You have to face whatever, comes up on that dig site. So you've got to be very much multidisciplinary. And the science as well now makes it possible to be multidisciplinary. I don't just jump in a hole now with a trowel and scrape in the sand until I pull up a piece of pottery. You know what I mean? I've got to know that all the things I'm doing, I've got to accommodate where that's going to go after me, because it'll all go off to science. It'll go off for analysis, carbon dating, etc., etc. But the book's very honest about that as well. I've tried it as much as I can be, to be honest. I'm kind of renowned for saying the things that other people in my profession don't say. I'm very shoot it's a duck. You'll have found that from the book, I would imagine, especially to do with dating and things like that. The whole profession, the whole history and DNA and archaeology and everything, the whole profession likes to be able to say, oh, we know exactly how old that is. It was 10,542 BC in the June. It's kind of, that's what they like to be able to say. It just 99.999% of the time, it's just not like that, and the science, I say it in the book, every 10 years or so, the science modifies, because we're just basically getting better at it. But as I said, the point I suppose I'm making is that back to where we were, that they need to throw out the old and bring in the new, so that we're developing and we're moving forward at a reasonable speed. We need to pick up the pace a bit now in the 21st century. The Victorian excuses don't wash anymore. We need to sort of get on with it, So yeah, there you go. Once you get me going, you can't stop me.
Well, I love it, and it's perfect. And your perception is why I want to have you on the show. Your approach to this professionally is what I enjoy the most, because you at least have hubris and you at least know how the system works. And instead of, let's say, for instance, someone like a Stephen Hawking, let's say, allegedly would have a pretty difficult time accepting new information that would have shattered, air quotes, his career, rather than like you being open-minded. I bet if somebody came up to you and said, hey, we found something that actually negates your entire work, you'd be proud, you'd stand by him, you'd say, you know what, I discovered this, but because you discovered that was the reason they actually found the actual truth to it. You know what I mean? So you're still credited as part of this, and there's no ego in that. There shouldn't be, especially in scientific discovery, because everything is based on this. So I am curious about what you found, rather, that discounted Darwin's theory of the origin of species with the implementation of when you started viewing it in conjunction with DNA.
Well, DNA is an interesting structure in itself. It's an interesting part of the plan that we're all a part of, in the sense that it probably is the only thing that is really predictable. You can say, right, that is what DNA is, how it functions, what it's made of. And we've moved on so fast since DNA was first, conceived, analysed, discovered. We've moved on so quickly that we're now at the stage where we're almost, how can I put it? Do you remember when we used to have cassette recorders? We used to record stuff on tape, and then all of a sudden they went, oh, wow, that's fantastic. Let's take it further. So then we finished up on CDs, and then CDs went out. And now it's all, digital, this, that, and the other. DNA's pretty much moved at the same speed, almost comparative to that kind of technological development. So we're now at the stage where we can look at DNA and we can go, well, do you know what? We'll change that bit of DNA in this, string of barley, because we can get rid of the insects that are attacking it. Now, some people don't see that as being particularly good, because you can pinch DNA from elsewhere. You could nick a piece of, something out of a pig's DNA and combine that with, a certain breed of apple to produce an apple that, is resistant to the kind of things that you find out in different environments, etc. So the mix and match kind of thing with DNA, we're at that stage where we kind of understand it. The concern there is that we're sort of playing with it, we're sort of messing with it. What's come out very, very quickly, very early on, is certainly in nature, once you know what that DNA is, it doesn't suddenly one day become something else. So that T-shirt with the, fish turning into a monkey, turning into a person, turning into us, does not work. We're actually only one chromosome away from a pig. So if Darwin knew that, Darwin would have gone, well, maybe we evolved from a pig. And people would have gone, yeah, that's possible. It's vaguely possible. But we're nothing like the monkeys, nothing like the gorillas, nothing like the chimpanzees at all. And I think I kind of sort of mention it in the book that there were other racial issues, shall we say, in the Victorian era that people were leaning towards, and they took hold of that and they used that as justification for a lot of the things they did back then, which is just out of order. You know, in the 21st century, we can't support that. It's insupportable. But in nature, if something mutates, if the DNA does mutate, most of the time that mutation doesn't survive. If we mutate it, so we create a GM crop or whatever and we shove it out in the real world, that doesn't survive either. So it's beginning to look like, and I'm jumping ahead of the science now, but it's beginning to look like you can't improve on nature. It's like the DNA fits perfectly wherever you find that DNA, which then means that when you start looking at different species and you look at the theory of evolution, et cetera, it just doesn't work. One thing does not turn into something else. You know, you don't have a cat turning into a bird that turns into a dog that turns into whatever. You know, we didn't develop from bacteria. We didn't develop from worms and things like that. But now we're on to dangerous ground, because all the beautiful confidence that humanity had that that's how everything was, and you look back down the years of time and you go all the way back to the beginning, and it's a fabulous pattern. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful piece of science fiction that makes us all feel really comfortable. But it isn't true. It's not true. What the DNA and early species and early peoples are showing us is that everything seems to have been designed to fit wherever it is. Everything is right. It's perfect. And at some point, something went wrong. Now, whatever it is that went wrong was big enough to affect the entire planet. So, again, only in recent times, very recent times, have they discovered that there's a socking great meteorite crater under Antarctica. In fact, it's down to the United States, actually. I think it was the US Geological Survey did the ice sheets in Antarctica. And when all the data finally came back and it was analysed, there's this socking great big crater. There's another one, which is the entire of the Gulf of Mexico. That whole Gulf, the whole of the Gulf of Mexico, is a huge crater. Now, I've been down there. I've been to the Yucatan Peninsula, had a look round, no doubt about it. Something came down and flattened it. Now, those kind of impacts, which, again, make us feel really uncomfortable, because, one day you might wake up and go, oh, look, there's one. You know what I mean? It's kind of on that level, you know what I mean? Oh, dear, well, how long have we got before that one hits? You're into disaster movie territory. Well, there's plenty of evidence to say that this happened. Something smacked into Tunguska in Russia in the 1920s, and you kind of look at all these things and you think, okay, it's making us feel a bit uneasy, but it's that uncertainty. We have to embrace that uncertainty. Something definitely happened. It upset the apple cart, and then give Darwin his due. What he actually did right about modification and survival of the fittest, in a sense, it's adaptation. So he instinctively knew that something had gone wrong, and that all the species, that's everything, from fish to farmers, everybody had to change. Everything had to change to accommodate those cataclysmic events. The question then that I was left with is, well, I wonder what it was like when it was perfect. Mm-hmm. Where did we start? Where did this all begin? Which was a nice point, really, again, getting back to human heads. It was a nice point to come back to the human beings that may have been back then, and then further back, and then further back again, and so on and so on and so on. And it does look like we've gone around in cycles. It looks like there's been perfect, and then nearly perfect, and then not so perfect, and then, well, okay, that's acceptable, and then it's getting a bit less acceptable now, and then things are devolving, and we know that that's a mechanism that exists in nature. So that comes as no surprise. Things get older, things deteriorate, things decay, etc., and that happens on a huge scale. I'm sure if there's any astronomers listening out there, they watch planets and galaxies decay. Everything eventually goes through the same process. So it's, I think in ancient times, we had an enormous respect and appreciation for the mechanics, the mechanisms that were involved in nature and in the planet and in the universe. And what's happened somehow in the last couple of hundred years, perhaps since the Industrial Revolution, we suddenly think now that we're superheroes and we're powerful enough to be able to override all these things, and Yeah, pride before a fall. That's my concern. I know as an archaeologist, entire civilizations have vanished. Aztecs disappeared, the Egyptians disappeared, the Roman Empire collapsed. Maybe all for different reasons, but in that sense, nothing lasts forever. So I suppose there's a message in the book that's kind of saying to humanity, don't get too cocky. Don't get too comfortable. Don't park your feet by the fire just yet, because it might not be that comfortable, the ride in the future. Hence the zip line, the end of the world, because the mystical history of glass is the unveiling of perhaps the structure of things. Then the end of the world is you've just got to accept it, But the end is never the end. I mean, there's always stuff left. There's always more to go on and on and on and on. It seems to rebirth itself each time. Maybe not as good as the time before, but again, it just carries on. Beginning, loads and loads and loads of ends, and then the end. I don't know when the end is going to come, but hopefully not too soon.
Hopefully not. I'm having a good time. This is a cool place. I'm enjoying myself.
Yeah, I like being here.
Yeah, right. Well, I am curious then, because Darwin's work sought to identify the origin of species, specifically mankind, right? And so if we didn't come from monkeys, and what Darwin was showing us was just an adaptation based on climatic issues or challenges that humanity and actually all of the species of the world, from farmers to fish, as you put it, very nice. What in your mind then would explain the origin, or is that what you're out to do? Or you don't have to have a stake in the game. You could just say, well, I don't know what it is, but it's not that.
I try to nail my colours to the mast, because if I knew for certain what a fabulous conclusion to the book that would be. So I wrestled for about 3 years to try and get an ending to it. And prior to that, I used to do this thing as a PowerPoint. It started off as a PowerPoint presentation that lasted about an hour. And it's the only PowerPoint that I've ever done, because I've done loads of them, I've done hundreds of them over the years. You get to the end of it and it doesn't have an end. It's never had an end. So I thought, let's try and have a nice, comfortable end, because people like nice, comfortable endings. But I think I'm leaning more and more towards the idea of, intelligent creation structure of some form, which, to the religious, that's like, it's God, it's a creator, it's whatever. But to the non-religious, they might say aliens or panspermia, or which is, seeding the life on the planet. I don't have any problems with any of those, because they're almost the same thing, but just using different words. It comes down to semantics at the end of the day. I definitely know that perfection only comes when something is done absolutely correctly, when it's right. And I also know that organization, design, intelligence, is something that you can only attribute to almost a perfect being, if you like. So there has to be something that begins it, that creates it, that starts it. But in answering, if that's the answer to the question, then what you've done is you've effectively not answered the question, because I think I said it in it. There's a French saying, God defined is God finished. So the minute you get to a point where all of a sudden you understand the thing that made us, then it's no longer the thing that made us, because it's become lower than us, not higher than us. So whatever it is that's put the whole thing together is an awful lot better than us. It's bigger than us. It's more intelligent than us. It's probably not even male and female. It's not like Star Trek. It doesn't walk on with 2 arms, 2 legs and a head, even if it comes from planet Zog. You know what I mean? We can't quantify it. Who knows what this thing is? It might just be pure intelligence in a gas cloud. It's beyond us to know what that is. Again, if you go down the religious route, some people might feel that we will encounter this being, this thing, whatever it is, on death. We may be released from the box we're in now to a bigger box, or to a bigger concept, to a bigger universe. So I'm aware of that in the background all the time. I've got that running in the background all the time, and it's in the book as well. But no, there's for a beginning, for me, the facts, the actual physical scientific information tells me that it's always been better in the past. And if you evolve that backwards, if you wind it backwards, you must get to a point where it's pretty amazing. It's got to go all the way back to something that's pretty damn good at the start. So I'm going to go with that, mainly because the facts back that up. Doesn't matter whether you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian or a Mormon or, Catholic or whatever you are. All of them one day will sit down and go, yes, that's where we started. That's where I see it going, in the long term. And that would be amazing. That would just catapult us into the 21st century like you wouldn't believe, because, something we can all agree on. Again, a lot of the religious, a lot of the scientific community, a lot of people, they hide the facts. They're scared to admit that is the direction the arrows are pointing in, But then at the same time, you've got to accept that, there's this death and destruction and this decay, and it's kind of, it's a sword that cuts both ways. In accepting one, you've got to accept the other. I don't have a problem with that, but an awful lot of others might. It's one of those. The same creator, in essence, that created everything right at the very beginning, was probably aware of where this was going to go. And because we're humans and we make value judgments and judgments about righteousness and justice and all the rest of it, we'd look at that creator and we'd almost accuse them of being wrong. But how can we? Do you know what I mean? It's like, we're not even in the same league. It's not for us to make those calls. And I think if people could get to that position, it'd just be a better world. Everything would be so much better. So, I hope that answered the question. My God, that went round the block, didn't it?
It went perfect. And to something what you said, and it's absolutely perfect. And you're my favorite kind of guy doing research in any area because you're open to all of it. You're like, well, this doesn't exclude that. And one thing that I really like about the conversation scientists are having lately is more simulation talk. And the simulation argument at a level, whenever you reach, a certain level with that, you start zooming out a little bit. And any organized religion that doesn't organize itself around fear and hate, then I would say that at some level, an architect of an extremely advanced digital matrix or a simulation, or a god or a creator of an organic simulation, perhaps, you would be imperceivable to us. The old Arthur C. Clarke quote that any high technology would be imperceivable for magic or miracles in this case. So I think because the conversation is so interestingly happening on both sides, and they're both saying the same damn thing, they're just viewing it through different lenses. Eventually, perhaps that gap will narrow a little bit, and there'll be some common ground. But this is why I like guys like you doing the research like this. Also, to something that you said about God rearranging itself, or us being less than or equivalent to or higher than. There's a fun theory that states that if anybody ever figures out the nature of reality, the universe instantly stops and resets and organizes itself in a different way, so you can't ever discover it. That's almost like that's the reason why chaos was built in. So you're into chaos formula there, chaos theory and what have you. Anyone who's creative, anyone who's an artist, I mean, you're a musician yourself, so you know that you push and you push and you push and you try harder and harder and harder to get better and better and better. Sooner or later, you get to a point where you realize that somehow there is a consciousness that exists, and creative people kind of dip into that consciousness. I recently found it in Tesla's writings. Tesla reached it, and he actually said it. There is this creative thing that exists within everything. But that's as far as he got, and that's as far as I've got. We kind of know it's there. But I think I say it in the book, there's so many things that we know are there. We know about eternity and omnipotence and omnipresence, and, we know about time and mathematics and this, that, and the other. But there's a point, as you rightly say, there's a point beyond which we can't go. There's a barrier. So the harder you try to be creative, the harder you try to push in. The Einsteins, the Teslas, the Hawkings, they've all tried to push in. But as you say, it's like a fail-safe. The harder you push in, the harder it pushes back. There'll be a million scientists on planet Earth that listen to this, and they'll all be going, yeah, we've been there, we've done it, we've been sat in a lab, all of a sudden we thought, wow, this is really where it's going, and then they've thought, oh, but hang on a minute, we don't understand that. We don't know where that's going to take us. We can't go any further with that. Anyone that does advanced mathematics, the same thing applies. It gets to the point, where you just can't go any further. It won't allow you to go any further with the resources and the physical existence that we have. You just can't get past it at all. But we know it's there. It's, eternity in our hearts. But what does that mean? We can have conversations on those levels, but not really understand
what it's all about. You know it's in your head, but you don't really know it in your heart. You can feel it in your spirit, but there's no physical evidence that you can apply. There's no, back to us all being very structured as beings. We like things to be, even on a bigger level, we like them to be established and easy to comprehend. But nah, it's like nailing jelly to the ceiling. It really is.
And I like that analogy. This is where the idea of as above, so below goes. And we anthropomorphize a lot of the systems in place here as things that must happen out there because of the as above, so below principle. But perhaps it's not like that at all. Maybe it's just so far out and so crazy that we just have no idea what's going on.
I don't know. Some of it's like that. I found that was perhaps the best analogy to use when we were talking about, in the final chapter of the book, I talk about the idea of escaping from the bounds of the planet. Mm-hmm. And the only way really that you can look at the upper atmosphere is to look at how things settle out in a tank of water. Dump a handful of soil in a bucket or drop a handful in a glass of water and it settles out. You get all these different layers, different levels. Turn that upside down if you possibly could, and that's basically what your Van Allen belts are. The bigger the stuff is, the further out it is. The smaller it is, the closer it is. So again, it's the as above, so below. It is things do function according to rules. That settling out in liquid is the same as things settling out in gravity. It's the two things are operating the same, and it's easy to appreciate that. That's easy to get a handle on. So some things like that, yes, some things are easy to understand, but the idea of firing something out through that's another issue. I'm not a massive fan of the idea that we can get out past 2 Van Allen belts, radiation, and goodness knows what else. You'll find that in the book as well. It's very hard to chuck stuff out. The idea of outer space actually is the gap between the 2 Van Allen belts. Most stuff never gets out into space. And then you could do another program on did we land on the moon? Did we get out there? What's that all about? You could do an entire program just on that. There's a colossal amount of evidence coming out that it didn't go the way that NASA would like you to think it went. But now you're into the UFOs and the conspiracy side of it.
We're into all of it all the time, brother. So yeah, and I'm right there with you. And NASA, a lot of us think stands for never a straight answer, or not a space agency. And so we need to have a NASA chat, man. So I'm going to leave that part on a cliffhanger, but I really, really want to ask you about it. But we have just tons to cover here. So I just want to ask you just a philosophical question back to what you said just real quick, because it was very interesting to me that you said that the closer we get, the more it pushes back. And I agree with you. But it's at this point, talking to you now, that I wanted to bring up a question that's just hit me. So do you feel, just philosophically maybe, there's no right or wrong to this, that because things get so strong or resistant when you get closer to the truth of them, I'm looking at it in two ways. So I'm just curious where your mind is. One, it's a way to pass a test of a certain sort, right? It's a barrier to knowledge. So by overcoming it, in that right alone, you've earned the right to the knowledge, right? Or is it kind of like an out of bounds, like you said? There are like video games where if you're playing in a certain area and you run too far, it'll tell you, hey, you're out of bounds, turn around, and it'll physically pick you up and turn you around because this is where your attention is supposed to be focused. So it's almost also like, hey, yeah, you could look over there and pursue that, but you're kind of missing there's waterfalls back there, man. There's like really fun stuff over there going on, and maybe you just go play with your family or something. You know what I mean? It seems like maybe one or the two. So what do you think?
If there's a creator still knocking around somewhere, I think he's having an enormous belly laugh at the moment, because that is a hugely interesting question. I think actually the answer is yes. That's in a nutshell. The answer is yes. I think both of those things act together. But if you start to break them down, I think that, yes, there's going to be a limit beyond which we can't go. You know what I mean? You can't swim around in a nuclear reactor. You're going to die. So, we are limited in what we can do. We can't climb inside a volcano unprotected because you just burst into flames. So there are limitations that are built in, very obviously built in, to prevent us from going down certain avenues. So I think that's absolutely true. But at the same time, boy, are there a lot of avenues we can go down that we haven't gone down. I would if I'd have been around in a position of authority in the 1960s when they were talking about chucking all that money at sending something off to the moon, I'd be like, well, don't waste your money. You've got the oceans. You know, what's at the bottom of the Marianas Trench, for goodness sake? Why don't you send something down there? It physically exists. You can physically get to it. Why are we not developing technology to do that? Or get inside a volcano, or go under the ice, or, you know, why are we not in a position now, you know, nearly 100 years down the line from, you know, all these things that we've developed? Why are we not in a position where we've got a really, really good appreciation of the physical world we live in? Because that makes a difference. That does actually change things. You know, why have we not got it? Why have we not sunk all our time and effort and money and et cetera into doing that? Because ultimately, that's what's going to save us. It'll save us as a species. It'll save the planet. It'll save us if there's a cataclysm. You know, I mean, we know the dinosaurs got obliterated. You know, it's 99% certain it was a meteorite, just took them all out. That was it, because they couldn't survive after that had happened. Or the biblical route, you know, there's some enormous flood. We don't know the cause of it, but everything ends up underwater. When it comes back out of the water, people need to survive. People have got to do it. You know, they've got to make it through the ice age and things like that. We know all these things have happened. You know, that's a fact. Why are we not investing money in that direction? You know, believe me, there's a journey there that's going to take a lot of generations to get through if we really want to understand that. You know, somebody will be sat there at the end of this 100-year period, this period, this century. They'll be sat there looking back at this interview going, well, we know so much more about DNA now. You know, this is not quite how we thought it was at the beginning. It's going to be like this, and this. That's where we should be going. Not looking at, you know, shooting a tin can with a couple of guys in out past the Van Allen belt at a rock that doesn't appear to have anything on it, if you assume that we can do that, you know, and spending an enormous amount of time and effort and money doing that. Why bother? You know, it profits and benefits a relatively small number of living human beings on planet Earth compared to what benefits we'd get from the other direction. So I think, like I say, the answer's yes to both directions. I think in one direction, there's a limit. And as hard as we push it, I don't think we'll ever break through. It is like that boundary around a computer game where you can't leave the platform. And then at the other side, yes, there's so much more. You know, there's so much more. Maybe the answers that we actually seek are more in that direction. Time, space, you know, relativity, gravity, whatever we can do, that's what we've got to play with. You know, we know we can work with that. So that's where I'd put my money. That's the direction I think we should be going in. Actually, I'm also going to assume that is the direction that we are genuinely going in. But a lot of the twaddle that you hear about, and indeed a lot of the stuff that does physically happen, but doesn't really have a good reason to happen, a lot of strangeness that goes on is covering up where they're going. You know, that direction. A lot of it is smoke and mirrors, because they don't actually want you to know what they're doing. They don't want you to know where that road takes them, because it's to their advantage for you not to know. You know, it could even be to humanity's advantage for you not to know. You know, if you know, you can throw a spoonful of sugar into a chemical reaction and it creates a black hole. You don't want, you know, little Johnny doing that as his science experiment. You know, I know I'm exaggerating to prove a point, but you know, you don't want everybody barreling into something that at some point is not understood. You know, the classic is UFOs. We had an incident over here, because I live between Manchester and Liverpool, so we've got airports, lots of airports. Manchester, there's a big hill at the back of Manchester called Rivington, and it was classic UFO territory. People used to sit there, and there were actual close-up photographs of triangles with big lights in the middle and a light on each corner, and they were whizzing back and to and doing all kinds of gymnastics over Winter Hill, and it was going on for years, about 7 or 8 years. And then the Ministry of Defence came out and just went, yeah, we're testing stealth aircraft. That was it. But it suited them for everybody around here to think they were UFOs, you know. But they actually just came out and went, yeah, we've got them. And there was photographs of these black triangle things coming out of aircraft hangars. And that's what they were doing. They were supersonic, aircraft. That's all they were, with covered in stealth. But the lighting configuration underneath, people thought they were UFOs doing all these gymnastics over the local hill. That's a typical sort of cover-up scenario, if you like, where they just keep something going because they basically just don't want anybody to know what they're up to. But then the next question then is, with films like Men in Black and stuff like that, are they kind of showing you what the future is, without actually telling you that they've already got it? It's already there. When I did Europe's Roswell, the UFO crash, the stuff that we fished out, the wreckage, they couldn't identify it back then. It crashed in the 80s. The wreckage turned up. We had it analysed, and I did the documentary in the 1990s, and nobody knew what the hell it was. I had no idea whatsoever. Now, it looks like it was a primitive form of graphene attached to duralumin, which is a form of alloy that's used in fighter aircraft. But we didn't know what it was back then. And even British Aerospace couldn't tell us what it was, because it's come from some form of secret vehicle that has crashed, and it's obviously fragmented. But we physically had it. So, it wasn't some kind of strange alien thing that, came from Mars or whatever. We physically had it. And 30 or 40 years on, we know what it is now. It's finally come out. I think a lot of things that we're seeing now will have the same outcome. The same thing will happen again, because I can't believe that they're just pumping all this money into chucking tin cans out into space. That's not what it's all about. It's not at all. They want you looking sort of that way instead of looking this way. That's what it's all about. The answer's here. The answer is out there somewhere, but it's down here. Definitely.
I feel the same, and I feel also that it's probably a few things. It could be contrived, the narrative, let's say, if it's not accurate and it's not what they say, and they are hiding something. It's probably definitely the actual structure of this place, like what this place is actually made of and what it is. Let's say if it's flat, this is why people have arguments about flat Earth or not, or maybe like a realm or something like that. But that is what it seems. And the more they fake things, and the more obviously they fake things, a lot of people have pointed this out. NASA gets $57 million a day to do whatever they're doing. And so if they're lying about stuff and they're green screening things, a lot of their budget does not go into their special effects, because whoever they're hiring for it is awful. My nephew could do way better, and he'd only charge you like $100 or something like that to do it. So I'm with you on this, and I think that it is a deliberate disguising of information. I would say it's definitely, like you said, man, pointing you in the wrong direction. And whenever you really do look within yourself instead of out there and all of this, it's a great metaphor for, spiritually, this is what people talk about. This is where the changes occur and where the real knowledge is, exactly back to what you said. So I'm fascinated by the perspective. So
excellent.
I want to talk about some skulls. Okay. Head is an interesting one. I'm very fascinated about elongating skulls. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Okay. Where do I dive in? Okay, well, let's pick up the conversation logically from where we've left off. At the end of the day, most people assume that if it's a very large capacity cranium, it probably has something to do with aliens. That's the assumption, but it is only an assumption, because at the end of the day, we've got those skulls, we've got them, and we've got depictions of them, we've got models of them. The whole elongated cranium thing physically exists. It's here on planet Earth. It's in a number of different societies. The Celts had it, the Egyptians had it, Genghis Khan and the Huns had it. And most shockingly, those same people appear in America, on the American continent. So it does kind of shake the narrative a little bit in terms of American history. Very, very, very recently, they analysed some of the Paracas skulls, and they came back either European or Middle Eastern in origin. That's the DNA, essentially. I've paraphrased that tremendously, so if anybody's out there, please don't shoot me down for that. But in a nutshell, that's how it's looking. That's their trail, if you like. That's where it takes them back. But because they're physically here, you're not digging these things up out of crashed flying saucers. You're digging these things up from archaeological sites, archaeological context. So you've got to accept right at the outset that wherever these skulls turn up, they're obviously a different form of us. or we're a different form of them, depending on which way round you look at it. And as the DNA is coming back, that is precisely what's coming out, especially the reliable science and the reliable DNA coming from South America and the Paracas, etc. They've got the most extreme skulls. I mean, I am secretly a fan of Eric von Daniken. I know that name, brings terror into the scientific community. But what I always say to everybody, at the end of the day, he popularized and publicized the identification and the release and the bringing out of that information. Yes, he got bits of it spectacularly wrong, but who cares? Because at the end of the day, what a publicist, you know what I mean? And some of the photographs he's got of the triple capacity skulls are just out of this world. We're now at a stage where there have been reconstructions of these super beings as they are. It's got to the point where the scientific community are using terms like Lord of the Rings world. When they're looking back, they're saying, okay, if there can be, 30 different species of cat, 30 different species of dog, 30 different species of monkey, why can't there be 30 different species of human beings, from tiny right up to giant, which is the same pattern. We're back to the as above, so below and all that. It's the same pattern. It's a recognized pattern of biology living on planet Earth. The actual facts are supporting that. So now when we find, giant footprints in the Pawksley riverbed and things like that, which are huge human footprints, and we find all kinds of things like the little tiny guys that they got off the island near in Indonesia, the little hobbit people that never grew more than about 3'6". All these different things that are turning up, all of a sudden they all make sense when you think, well, they're all different variations of human species. And the DNA that's coming out of some of the remains, where they can get it, is showing exactly that. Now they've got mystery races. They've got people like the Denisovans. They've got Neanderthals breeding and producing other things. They've got 2 Asian communities of human beings whose DNA are different, and they've never even found the physical remains. It's just they're interbred. So those traces, if you like, those fingerprints are left in other DNA. So the world now is suddenly starting to look like this Lord of the Rings world, which is absolutely fantastic. But it's not aliens. Back to where we came in at the beginning. It's nothing whatsoever to do with aliens. So in the book, I take great pains to try and explain what the human skull is and what the human brain is. And all of a sudden, in the process of doing that, it explains where a lot of the other mysteries come from, like the giant 30-ton blocks at Baalbek that they've shoved halfway up a wall. How the hell did they move them? I mean, there's recently in Russia, apparently, there's a mountain out there built from blocks that are just so ridiculous, they don't even look like blocks. Somebody went out there and just built something out of these enormous great stones. Things like that. All the ancient technologies, the Baghdad battery, the light bulbs that they found in Egypt, the little aeroplanes that turn up in South America made of gold, you name it, go right the way through, Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, do the whole 9 yards. It's all explainable if you just have that triple capacity head, because that's equivalent to, and the only way I can say it, is equivalent to 3 Einsteins. That's, if you want an equivalent, it's easy to understand. That individual with that brain is capable of the calculation, the appreciation, the understanding of 3 Einsteins. So what you're looking at there is a supercomputer. It's a biological supercomputer. Times that by all the different races that had that capacity that used to exist. And all of a sudden the idea of, levitating things and using sound waves to do things, and, the whole science, if you like, it drops off the Richter scale. What those people were capable of doing with that brain capacity. But it does also bring in other things as well. It brings in interesting points, which is, if they could do that, if they could build buildings like that, and we've got the physical remains, what could they do that's not physical? Mm-hmm. Where else could they go? What appreciation did they have, for example, of the ecological side of things and the survival of the planet and how they operated? If I was a super intelligent race like that, I would do everything I possibly could not to damage the planet and not to leave any rubbish behind, and, not to do anything of that nature, because, of course, I would understand the planet. I'd understand how it operated, how it worked on a huge scale. So you don't necessarily just fall over the archaeological remains, because in many cases they're just not there. You know, the Native Americans lived in harmony with their environment. Well, just times that by 10,000, because that's what these people would have been like. But at the same time, did they also crack other problems? Did they have atomic energy? Did they have electricity? How did they view things like solar power, wind power, and all the elements, if you like, the elemental side of the planet? What else were they capable of doing with the capacities they had? If you just had one of these guys with the enormous head, that would be tremendous, just to be able to sit and chat to one of these guys. There were tens of thousands of them all over planet Earth. They would have pulled up the entire planet literally by its bootlaces. They would have run this place in a way that we simply couldn't. At the end of the day, my only conclusion is that they were, in the book in particular, that they were so intelligent, they were so super intelligent, they realized that their own end was inevitable. That I think they reached a point where they realized that there was not enough of them genetically or physically to continue in the way that they previously would have done. And then they would also have had problems with us. Archaeologically, wherever we go, we tend to wipe out the opposition. So you've then got this other race, this violent, nasty, kind of almost thuggish race that's out there to get everything it possibly can. All the things that are bad about the human race, they'd have just spotted that immediately. They'd have seen that coming, a wave of that coming at them. And I think they just thought, well, do you know what? Death's not a problem to us. We don't fear death. We don't fear ducking out of this place. This place is programmed. It's going to go where it's going to go. Whatever set this place up did it right. So if it's the right time for us to bow out, we'll bow out. I think that's how they went. I think they literally went gracefully into the night. They just went silently into the night and ducked out. And what we're left with now, I mean, the Pracus skulls, some of them are as recent as 300 to 500 years old. So we've only recently lost them. That's what's really sad. That amazing race, especially the Pracus, have only recently departed. So all the knowledge, everything they had has just gone. I mean, I have trouble remembering where I leave things around the house. These guys probably remembered 30 generations back. They'd have been able to sit down and tell you all the stories, all the information you needed to know. They'd have been able to do all that just from memory. They didn't have to write anything down. The guys that sat in the observatories out in South America planning the heavens, mapping the heavens and all that, they'd just done most of it in the head. They wouldn't have needed to calculate because they'd have had the capacity to do that. And I'm hoping that comes out in the book, which then leads on to where we came in again, back to the aliens again, these guys with enormous heads, and what have you. I tried very much to come up with something I was comfortable with that kind of fitted into that jigsaw puzzle. I'm not happy with them coming flying in from Venus or whatever, let's just come in. No, that doesn't sit comfortably with me. I don't think they're, Nephilim is a thing that's bandied about, but a Nephil, biblical study and all that linguistically, if you go back, Nephil just means giant. It just basically means a big bloke. So, yeah, of course the Nephilim bred. Of course they did, because they were big. They were big fellas. It's got nothing to do with angels coming down with wings out of, silver discs and breeding with women and all that. That's nonsense. That's something that's only come up in the 20th century. I wasn't comfortable with any of these ideas at all. And then it just dawned on me, if they could do what they were capable of doing, then they can time travel. It's that simple. They know that they can get in at one end and come out at the other end. But that also would explain in a backwards way why we're getting them now.
Yes.
It's not aliens coming to visit us because it's, we're important in their past and they're our future. It's the other way round. It's in effect, in a way, it's the caretakers coming back to make sure that what they left ends up where it's supposed to end up. Now, to me, that makes a lot more sense. If you value something and you love something and you understand something, you're going to watch it, look after it, care for it, and where it finishes up, in a way, is more important. Where that project, that thing that's part of you ends up, that is really important. So I don't say that these things don't exist. I'm not one of these people that goes, oh, you're hallucinating, there's no such thing, etc., etc. But I do believe that they physically exist. I don't think it's a case of, anything mystical or magical or coming through dimensions or anything like that. It's simply science that is way out of our reach. We just do not get it. We don't understand it. But I seriously think these guys are coming from the past, because if you can do what you can do, and we can see them doing it, and they can do that now, they could have done that at any point in time, and there is there's a trickle through time. You pick it up as an archaeologist, historian, of these guys popping up. Things appear, in paintings and carvings and all this, that and the other. It has got to have something to do with time travel, because wherever they go, it's the same people, it's the same technologies, it's everything is the same. And it's in one respect, I'm saying the same thing that others have said in the past before, but in another respect, I'm pushing forward something that a lot of people have not considered, because they're taking the easy way out. They're just saying, well, yeah, they're aliens, they're flying in from wherever, whatever planet. I don't think that's the case. Also, that also plays into back to the NASA conversation. It plays into that narrative. You know what I mean? That's where I think it comes from. So yeah, something crashed at Roswell, so they had something sat in Area 51 or whatever, yes, of course they did. But it didn't come from another planet. And I think there's some guys sat out there now that know, if they watch this interview, I'll challenge them and I'll go to the face, they know that these things are essentially us. It's the past. It's something from the past coming to now. And because the time travelers, they're capable of telling us what's coming next, they're capable of sharing advanced technology, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not future technology. They're simply sharing what they've always known. And that's why it works. That's why it fits in. They're taking what we've corrupted. They're taking out the corruption, out the chaos. They're removing all of that. And they're going, this is how you do it. And then all of a sudden, when we do it, hey, it works, because it fits. It fits that ball, that creation, it's part of that world that we live in, and it works. And the more you kind of think down those lines, the more it all makes sense. It really does. It makes complete sense. Did I answer the question? I'm not quite sure whether I answered the question in that.
My friend,
yeah.
you answered it so well and so amazingly, and you just blew my mind with that right there, because it's always something I've dipped my toe in as far as my favorite. Like if I had to plant I don't plant my flag or nail our colors to the mast, as you said, which I love that. I'm going to start using that. We don't do that here, but one thing that I love is marrying the interdimensional philosophy. I know Paul Askoff came on the show also with Flying Disc Press, and then as well the Kinsella boys, Ronnie had him and Philip on recently again, and Ronnie was talking about something that blew my mind as well about UFO crashes in general, because I've always wondered, just curiously to myself, why they crash, why we're able to bring them down. If they're so highly advanced and technologically crazy cool, why do they allow themselves to be taken down, is how I've always phrased it to myself, because I felt like that's what was happening. Ronnie came up with an awesome idea with this, and then they're doing it on purpose. They're leaving things, almost like breadcrumbs, like you said, they pop in throughout history. And we've all in the community thought that it was the U.S. government, perhaps, and it might still be. This doesn't exclude them from that, but doing what we call predictive programming, meaning where they put the and it started with War of the Worlds, and they started introducing the idea of this to other people, but they say that they come from other planets because they don't want to scare you, and they also don't want to let you know that time travel is real and a thing, because then people would be asking pesky questions like, well, why don't you just go back and keep Jesus from getting crucified, or why don't you go back and fix the whole Hitler thing, so maybe there's something like that, which also ties into another theory I've got about the entities themselves and how they communicate with us. There's an example I use on the show a lot about the movie The Matrix. And in that movie, there's a scene where Morpheus, the protagonist, goes to meet something called the Oracle, and she tells him that he is not the one, but he is the one. But the person who is supposed to give him the most knowledge and wisdom and truth, he thought, was the one that lied to him. But what he needed to hear was the lie so that he could become the one. How this leads to the extraterrestrials is perhaps they tell us things to guide us in a certain direction based on where we are intellectually and what we can handle as a species. Because if they interact with us at all, usually it's a myriad of things. Of course, it's take care of the planet, which, it's like we're renting this place for a little bit. We're only borrowing it. So they're like, we're going to want that back, so make sure you take care of it and get rid of your nukes and stuff. Also, they tell people that they're from the Pleiades or other star systems, but you would want to let people know that or tell people that and disguise the truth that there is time travel because, again, of the same pesky questions of suffering and horrors that could be avoided ideologically. But then you think about what I like and take most from this, and what I find really, really interesting, is this marries all my favorite, again, theories, that they're always from here. They're extraterrestrial, like interterrestrials, cryptoterrestrials is what Musgrave Evan calls them. And then they could do, basically, with the high intellect that we're talking about here, sound vibration. I mean, we really don't know what they're capable of, but we know that they would probably be capable of simulating woo-woo to us. So they could implant the screen memories that we talk about, that people say they saw an owl, turns out in hypnotic regression, you got abducted. So to this point, what I mean is, the point I'm making here would be that perhaps they could implant in our minds the idea of multiple races, of different entities visiting us from other places. So they could alter the way we see them. Oh, and now we're going to show up as reptilians to people, even though we're only these elongated skull guys from a long time ago. Now we're going to show up as Greys. Now we're going to show up as Pleiadians and look like Fabio. We're going to go mess with this Billy Meyer guy for a little bit. There's all of these things, and this is what one of the things makes me think about, because then it's back to what I've kind of leaned toward more than anything, which is like it's all the same damn thing. Could be like a version of Jinn or something, to where they're just not being honest. I've never trusted the phenomena. You know what I mean? I've never just blindly gone, oh, yeah, what you're telling everybody's true. And it could be something as simple but as glorious as this right here. So I love your hypothesis, man.
It swallows up a lot of what you've just said as well, because if it is a Lord of the Rings type world, then everything you've just described is possible. Any one of those creatures could travel through time in those machines, from, lizard men to giants to midgets to whatever, because they are that diverse. In the past, that's how that is. And the second thing that comes out is as you say, you could go back if you wanted to and change history, but I think the rule is that you can't. You're just simply not allowed to, because of the chaos that would result from that. So if they are from our past, then they are from this world, and to some extent, while they are so far ahead of us in terms of what they're capable of, they still have to play by the same rules. And that's what comes out when you look at abductions and crashes and all the different things that they do, and hypnotism and implanting and scientific experiments and all the sorts of things that they get up to. They are still essentially only doing the same things that we do. That's all they're doing. So again, it looks like they are still limited within the scope of the planet itself. So it almost means that although they are a super race, and they are, from the past, and they are superior in so many ways, if they were put here at the beginning and they are simply from a different period, a different phase in the planet's history, they are still limited by the same rules, by the same laws that we're limited by. It's the old story, as hard as you try to come up with an alien, it still nearly always ends up having 2 arms, 2 legs and a body and a face, and it's a bloke running around in a suit, because we're not capable of conceiving beyond what we have information available to conceive from. And I think the aliens are in the same position, aliens in the broadest sense. These guys, they're in exactly the same position. If you could sit down and have a beer with a 7-foot tall grey with a massive cranium and just sit down and have a chat with this guy over a beer, I'm sure he would actually say to you, well, you're absolutely right, and we're stuck with it. We're stuck with it the same as you. I genuinely think that's the case. I think they are trapped in exactly the same planet, the same ball that we're trapped on. And it fits. It really does fit. Also, it also has the advantage of all the other guys that have all the other ideas, all the other people you've interviewed, and the people that are into the same things we're into, the authors, the writers, the producers, etc. They're actually right. You can't sit down and have a row with them and go, well, you're talking a load of rubbish, you're not correct, you're not right. And yet the same applies to the people who've had the experiences, the witnesses, and the people who've seen these things and all the rest of it. It literally ticks every box. It nails everything. It's almost like Einstein's theory of relativity. That's it. You've reached the end of that road. Boom, that's it. Now we know what it is. You're almost at that point. I feel like in the book, it teeters on the verge of wrapping that up and saying, you're all right. All that information, it's all inclusive. Nobody out there is wrong. Nobody can sit down and go, oh, you didn't see that. that never happened to you. You're making that up. Because actually, there is that possibility that they're right. It's always there that, and I think if people got behind it and started to think down those lines, and they unified and started sharing information, you might actually end up with about, 16 different species. that, keep turning up. I know there was a thing with the shapes of UFOs in the 1970s. People were trying to look at them, and I think they came up with about 40 different varieties or whatever. There was a chart. It was like a UFO spotting chart. You could almost do the same with the creatures that come with them. Sooner or later, you're just going to have a list of what used to live on planet Earth in the past. That's where it's going to end up. But it's all inclusive, the same crazy madness, the same variety that is there in human beings, human species, human skulls, etc. That same craziness, the chaos and the madness applies to them as well, because they're part of this same crazy creation. They're just not from this particular paradigm, this time period. They don't function like we function. They don't think like we think, but they're still made of the same stuff. I end the book by saying we're all stardust. We are, we're all made from the same material that the rest of the cosmos is made from, etc. So are these guys. They're made from the same stuff. Once we get our head around that, I think we could literally take the whole UFO community and just move forward. We've got a clear direction and a clear vision, and clear way ahead. That could change, long after I'm gone. It could change what happens in the next century, the way people move on and look at things. For me, a turning point was George Adamski, Flying Saucers Has Landed. My dad had that on his bookshelf. He had a first edition, and I pulled it off. I think it's 1953 it's published or whatever. And I always go back to that because that's where my interest in UFOs started. I think it was about 7 or 8 years old. And I think in my lifetime, where we've come from that book to where we are now. And again, what I'm saying about time travel and about the way these beings are and the information that's come out and starting to come out now, we've moved so far from that book to where we are now, but the book is still valid. It still includes that, those strange looking flying saucer photos that are in there, and the stuff that was photographed against the moon and all this kind of stuff. None of it's wrong. None of it's wrong. It can be encompassed within the bounds of the idea that they are just another variety of us that just know us an awful lot more than us, a sort of a lot more than we maybe will ever know. And it does go back to the book again. I'm plugging the book here. I'm doing a really good job of plugging the book. I usually don't. I usually go way off piste. I usually end up, goodness knows where. But it does go back to the guys with the big heads, the human supercomputer. I know if people read the book, they're probably going to get to the bit about human heads. They're going to be like, what and why am I reading this? Why do I need to know how many plates make up a skull and, which bits of the brain do what, or, whatever. When you get to the end of that chapter, and you move on to the stretch head guys, it really starts to make sense, because some of the bits of their heads that were bigger than ours mean that the areas that we know about also are bigger. They expand. The different glands that you have, the different areas in the brain get bigger, and you start to think, well, some people have religious visions and they have religious experiences, and God talks to them, and, you got Moses up the mountain and he's chatting away and all the rest of it. What could these guys with the enormous heads do in that sort of department? What were they capable of where their religious consciousness sat in their heads? It does raise that question. Were they psychic? Could they read minds? Could they levitate? Did they have X-ray vision? Could they just speak to God like he was on the end of a telephone? Where does it take you? Because it's all bigger. Everything's bigger. So, that's where I came down at the end of it with as an idea that these guys are just made of the same stuff as us. They're just coming through. So, yeah.
Well, it's brilliant. All of your book is necessary, which, of course, guys, linked in the show notes. Highly recommend. I know we talk about a lot of books here, but this one is special and different. So definitely check it out. It is different. Yeah. It's just amazing, man. You're such a phenomenal writer as well. So which makes it even more enjoyable, because you're not struggling with your writing style. You're enjoying your writing style.
Oh, I love it.
So I wanted to ask you about crystal skulls. So what what role do they play in this entire story?
Okay. The first skull I really took any interest in was this fella. It's a copy of the Mitchell Hedges.
Yeah.
There it is. That's a copy of the Mitchell Hedges skull. I just thought I'd throw that one in. I started looking at the material, quartz, silicon. If I was an ancient race, why would I take the trouble to bother to make something like that? That is an enormous undertaking. It's just not easy. They reckon it could have took 20 or 30 years to polish the Mitchell Hedges skull to the level it's at. Under electron microscopes, there aren't any tool marks on it. There just aren't. They can't, there's no drill marks. There's no, it doesn't show where they filed the eyes out or anything like that. It's just phenomenal. So why would I bother with that? What's the key to all this? Well, it actually came by accident, the key to it, because I saw an article on some guys that had, I think it was 2013, down south in this country, they'd found out how to write information on glass. So they're making CDs out of glass, out of these glass discs. But then I thought, what is a glass disc? Well, it's silicon. It's going back to silicon. It's made of sand. That skull is made of sand. This planet is made of sand. The computer I'm talking to you on now that has silicon chips in it, and the lenses, the glass lenses, and the screen and everything, it's the same stuff. It's silicon again. It's going back to sand. So I really started pushing hard into this whole thing to do with sand and silicon. And there's always been this thing amongst the crystal community that quartz is a recorder. It records stuff. And most people have gone, you're talking rubbish. It's nonsense. It's pseudoscience. But no, these guys are recording data in 5 dimensions onto glass discs, and they can read it back, and it's there now. So you look at something like that, you look at a crystal skull and you think, if I could read it, what's in it? What's in that? Then it gets even more interesting. Okay, this is where it starts to really get interesting, because not all crystal skulls are made of that type of crystal. Some of them look a bit more like this fella. This one's rose quartz. And you've got lots of other types of quartz. You've got citrine quartz, you've got amethyst quartz, that's what it is. And the more I started looking into it, you've even got things like carnelian, which isn't renowned for being quartz, but it's got a very high silicon content. Flint has got a very high silicon content. I'm like, wow, right, okay, I'm an archaeologist, I love this. There they are, sitting there in the cave mouth, smacking out these flint tools, and they're made of silicon. That's what it is, it's silicon. So it just absolutely started to blow my mind. And then the real clincher at the end of the day, they did a scientific modelling of planet Earth. And the biggest problem they've had is every time they stick a magnetic iron core into the centre of the computer model, the whole thing just goes wrong. The planet ceases to function. It does not work with an iron core. And I can't remember the name of the guy, but some bright spark said, I'll tell you what, there's that much silicon knocking around. Let's try a silicon core. They've got it to the point now where they can tell you that the core of the Earth, the centre of the Earth, to make it work, to get rid of, I think it's Olson's paradox, which is where everything goes wrong. The electric fields don't work, the magnetic fields don't work. To get rid of that paradox, that core is made of amethyst. So you are spinning on a lump. Hey, good man, yeah. There's a giant lump of that. Basically, it's the same as that skull over there, same as that. It's just quartz with impurities in it. It's capable of doing something that ordinary quartz can't do. It's just, I can't remember what makes amethyst, to be honest. I'm not quite sure. They know what turns it purple. But that's the formula they reckon is the core of the planet. So I'm thinking, now I know. Now I've got a reasonable idea why the Aztecs started banging these fellas out. This is a real one. That's why they chose quartz as the center of all things. The human experience of the planet through the head, through the face, through the senses, everything, the whole planet centers on quartz. Quartz is the key. And I got back to the point where, I mean, you can have silicon, but you can also have carbon. But carbon doesn't work on its own. Only silicon has got all the necessary chemical compositions and everything else going for it that produces life. It is literally, that is the key to our existence. And the next question was, who told them? How the hell did they find that out? You're talking about, you look at the Aztecs and you think, they lived in a jungle in the middle of, this Yucatan Peninsula and all the rest of it. How on earth did they cotton on to the fact that crystal is that important, really is that important? And then there's always a kicker. There's always a kicker at the end. And the kicker is, you're not going to believe what doesn't develop if you don't have silicon. The brain.
The brain?
the brain. Silicon deficiency, a deficiency of silicon in a developing human being will cause your brain to fail. So it's actually essential to the human head. Now, that is a very recent scientific discovery. As we develop as human beings, as we're actually made, as we are created in the ovary, in the womb, if you don't have silicon, your brain fails.
Damn. I'm going to tie this together with you for you right now in the most amazing way. Have you ever heard of the Arecibo crop circle?
I've heard of a lot of crop circles, but not by name. You might, if you tell me what the design is, I might recognize the design.
Yes, so
we get loads of them over here.
It's all good, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and I'll put it up in the video. So audio only audience, check for the video link in the show notes. Video audience right here is the Arecibo crop circle. Now, what this is it's basically a 10-point plan that we sent out into space first, by the way. So this is on a plate where it had all of our descriptive. I want to say Sagan did this, but I can't really remember, to be perfectly honest with you here. But what it means is we sent out an information out into the star system. It had 10 points on it, including where we're located, what we're made of, which is most important, and then a little kind of picture diagram of what we look like, bipedal.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, where we had our carbon as our chemical makeup, we got an answer from a crop circle that's not human made. Well, not human from this time period made.
Yeah.
And it answered the 10 points all in order of how we sent them out with their own. It showed the star systems they're allegedly from, but also where chemical composition was, where we were carbon, theirs was silicon. So they're silicon-based life forms. So there's already a tie-in to this entire theory that's here on the planet.
Well, that's it. In a nutshell, that's it. That is essentially it. It was the plaque that went out on the Voyager when they sent the Voyager probe out.
Exactly
it's the plaque that's attached. I think it was Sagan that did that one, as I remember. Mm-hmm. That would make a lot of sense. The chains that you can make, the molecular chains that come out of silicon, are you've got to combine them with other things, which is why that's essential for us, because that is the building bricks, if you like, the building blocks. Whereas carbon is it's a much simpler chain, and the carbon side of it doesn't function as well. It doesn't operate as well. But there's so much carbon on planet Earth. There's so much of it. I think it's the second or third most abundant created chemical or whatever. It's also to do with it being a solid and being a gas. You've got to have certain other things for us to be what we are. But again, it makes sense that if you take some of those things away, so you finish up with something focusing on silicon, then they would be fundamentally different. They would be very, very different creatures and very, very different beings, capable of different things, definitely capable of different things. But if there is a creator, if a creator built all this place, then one of the first things that creator put anywhere was silicon. It was sand, it was glass, it was quartz. That's one of the very first things that happened at the beginning. There's even a theory that there's an idea in a lot of the ancient myths. They have this idea that the earth solidified out of a liquid. There's a lot of that kind of thing going on. The Egyptians had it. They had dry land coming up as a reed raft out of the liquid. In the Bible, it says that there was water and it was without form and void, and then everything else gets built out of that. From a chemist point of view, from a scientific point of view, that's what happens when you create crystals. They solidify out of a liquid form. So it's the fundamental building blocks. I do actually mention it. I do a reasonably good job in the book of covering it. But yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic. I getting a response back, in a way, the response doesn't matter whether it comes from another planet or another time. Again, it's back to the all-inclusive. We actually got a response.
Yes.
It doesn't matter where they got the information from the plaque from either. Whether it was the designer and they realized we'd sent it out and the information came from here, or whether they suddenly caught wind of it, when it got so many million miles away, it doesn't really matter. The point is we got a reply, we got a response. So in a sense, that response is really important, because it does mean that these things are, how can I put it, well, on our wavelength. They're in our backyard. They're not a million miles away from us. Whatever they are, wherever they are, they're not that far away. And they're not absentee either. I don't think they're absentee. I think they are very much aware of what's going on. I really do.
I love this idea, and I like it a lot because it marries a lot of other things that I think about as well alternative history and how humanity is actually entropied over time, and we've degraded, we've de-evolved from these things rather than we are evolving into them, which that was kind of the hope before. That was kind of the light at the end of the tunnel with the future humans coming back in time machines is, well, we make it, at some level. Like we at least survive long enough for us to turn into these bulbous head things and come back with, play with our ancestors' beeholes, you know what I mean? So I think, though, that with this information that you're putting out, it's fascinating, man. Your book is phenomenal. Of course, all the ways to find you are going to be linked down in the show notes. We'll probably wrap it on this one, but I think this is fascinating, man. You're a delight. Yeah. You're a phenomenal guest, by the way. You're just amazing. You. So,
if people do want to find me, I'm going to make it about as simple as humanly possible. There's only really two ways to get me on an international level. One is to come and find me on Facebook. And my site's completely open. It's always been completely open. But I know Facebook has become dodgy and unreliable of recent times. The other way is to just send me an email. If you really if they contacted you and you felt that what they were trying to contact me over was of an important nature, by all means email me. And if I just leave it at that, it couldn't be simpler, really. I don't have hundreds of websites and thousands of places you can go and get me and all this kind of thing. I'm looking into Twitter. I'm looking into YouTube. I'm looking into these other things. But for me, it's always worked Facebook or email. So it's really simple, really, really simple.
I like it. Keep it simple. And I'll actually leave you with what Dr. Michael P. Masters calls, because he has the theory that they're intertempestrials, that they are future humans coming back in time machines. But I love your thing because, again, it kind of shows to the ancient knowledge that we lost.
Yes.
And
in a sense, it's important that time to them is not important.
Right.
It's irrelevant. Maybe they are from the future, but they're also from the past. But they're not. They're not from either.
Yeah.
Because time to them is just of no importance. It really is irrelevant.
Exactly. It's like the saying in the joke in Terminator Salvation, one of the Terminator movies, Genesis. Okay. He says, when do we want time travel? And the other guy says, it's irrelevant. So, because when you have it, time doesn't matter, right?
Exactly.
So, but I think this has been a phenomenal conversation. Like I said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. We have a lot more to talk about, so I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Please.
All the ways, both of the ways that you want to be found will be linked down in the show notes, as well as, though, all your books as well. I'm definitely going to make sure that folks know about that. So, Mark-Olly, you're welcome back anytime, brother. Thank you so much, man.
It has been a pleasure, and high noon in Texas again sometime. I really hope so. Really hope so. Thank you.
Man, that's awesome. I love theories like this. I love taking my favorite one, which is, of course, y'all know this, future humans coming back in time machines, and just flipping it on its head and making it the inverse. It's past humans that were way cooler than us coming future. It's like I made this comment to Mark off air, so I'll share it with y'all, but it's kind of like we're the kids that got left home over the weekend at our parents' house, and our parents are coming back home, and we had a party and just kind of screwed everything up. But anyway, so all the ways, again, to find him, linked down in the show notes. Make sure that you check out his book. It drops March 1st, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, The Mystical History of Glass and the Extinction of the World. Fascinating stuff. He's a phenomenal author, and you guys will absolutely love it. So also down in the show description down there are our affiliate links. So Food Forest Abundance, make sure that you check those guys out. Libsyn, if you want to start your own podcast, that's who I host through. Could not recommend them more. And then as well, if you were going to buy any damn thing at all through Amazon, run it through our link because it helps the show. It's a simple thing. It doesn't cost you anything extra other than what you're buying, and it helps us. So check it out. Also, make sure that if you want to expand your experience with us here on the show, you do so at expandingrealitypodcast.com. That is linked down in the show notes. That's going to be where all socials, merchandise, Rokfin, we're doing lives. There's the Too Hot for YouTube that's free to watch on the website, by the way, and it's free to go there, so just go check it out. We're doing a lot of revamps over there, so come by and show some love. It's really cool stuff. So anyway, go out into this beautiful place, whatever the hell it is, guys, and y'all pick up a piece of lita. Make sure that you're nice to everybody that you come across. It does not mean anything to go out of your way to smile at someone or to open a door or anything like that. It's a small thing, like buying somebody a coffee or a meal around you in line wherever the hell you're at, or somebody's groceries in front of you, something like that. Small things, massive ripple effects. Also, get out of the left-hand lane, of course, because it's a huge pain in the ass and you don't want to do that. And then above all and anything else, guys, go out into this beautiful, beautiful place, whatever the hell it is. And y'all just be good to one another. Thank you so damn much for listening. I'm going to say it again. Thank you so damn much for listening. We will see y'all next time.